evening, everyone. Welcome to this author interaction of the 2024 NLF Reading Challenge. My name is Karthika, and I hope you are as excited to be here as I am. The NLF Reading Challenge is a 3-month-long reading event from July to September 2024 for students between grades 4 to 6. It runs on the competitive as well as the non-competitive tracks. For the challenge, students read their way through a curated set of 30 books. They discuss their reading with their friends and their guide. They log their thoughts and get to interact with the authors of some of these books online. The challenge will conclude with a quiz competition that will see the 3 best teams win gold, silver, and bronze engraved trophies, certificates of achievement, and a wonderful set of books. For today's event, please use the Q&A box to type out your questions or your responses to what's being discussed during the session. If you're from a school, please mention the name of your school along with your question. Today, we are privileged to have with us the popular and award-winning author, M.G. Leonard. M.G. Leonard has written several books for children, including Beetle Boy, The Adventures on Train series, and the Twitches books. She says that her stories are for young people or people who are young at heart, who embrace nature's wild and crazy majesty. M.G. Leonard joins us today to speak about her book, The Ice Children, which is on the reading list of the challenge. Welcome, M.G. We're very happy to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this. I'm delighted to be here.
So are we. Would you like to begin with a short reading from the book, M.G.?
Indeed. I've just got to put my reading glasses on. I thought that I would read a small passage that's from the middle of the book. The book opens up with a very dark scene. Those who've already read it will know, of a little boy being frozen. And sometimes the opening of the story scares people. But I like to read this bit because it is reassuring what happens on the other side of being frozen. So it's from chapter 12, which is called Furfrost Forest. Although her eyes were closed, Bianca could see she was surrounded by a blazing, bright light. Am I dead? She wondered, blinking her eyes open. When she moved her arms, she found she was lying on her back in a soft eiderdown of powdered snow. The vast blue sky above her appeared to be held up by tall trees dressed in snowflake coats. Sunbeams bounced about like ping-pong balls. Bianca laughed with delight, swinging her arms and legs out in great arcs to make an angel. Curiously, she found that her right hand wouldn't swing as freely as her left. She lifted it, checking and turning it. It looked normal, and then she heard a man's voice like a distant echo. I've got your hand, Bianca. I won't let go. Who's there? She said, sitting up. But Bianca saw she was alone in a snowy clearing, encircled by fir trees. She twisted onto all fours, letting out a startled yelp as she found herself nose to nose with a brown-eyed reindeer. She crawled backwards, blinking. The reindeer drew back and blinked as well. Bianca tilted her head to the right. So did the reindeer. She tilted it to the left and let out a laugh of surprise as the reindeer mirrored her once more. Well, who are you? Bianca asked. Pordis, said a girlish voice inside her head. Who said that? Bianca looked around, alarmed. Pordis. Bianca leaped to her feet, and the reindeer jumped backwards. Who's there? Bianca stared into the shadows between the tree trunks. Pordis, came the voice again. Show yourself, Pordis, Bianca called out bravely, hoping she looked less scared than she felt. The reindeer trotted around Bianca and stopped, right in front of her. Bianca looked questioningly at the reindeer. You are Pordis? The reindeer bowed its head. I am Bianca. Yes. And you are Pordis. Yes. Bianca looked around to reassure herself that she was indeed having a private conversation with a reindeer.
That's excellent. I'm so glad you picked that particular part of the book to read aloud because we'll come back to it in just a bit. So we thought we'd
Excellent.
start, MJ, with some student questions. They get right to the crux of the book and the story. So we have this one from Swara Subramaniam of grade 6 at JVCN International School from Bombay. Two related questions, actually. One is, Swara's question is, what inspired you to connect a very modern problem to an old classic from an era when climate change was not a concern? And Riya Krishnan of grade 4 from Neve Academy in Bangalore asks, why did you deliver a message about climate change through a fantasy book?
Well, I'm so glad that you asked these questions, actually, because in all cultures right across the globe, we've used stories, human beings have, to understand our relationship to each other and the natural world. And fairy stories are the ones that, we used to tell our children around a fire. They weren't even written down. And they were often slightly magical, fantastical tales that enabled grown-ups to talk to young children about quite big concepts like famine or hunger or the risk, the deadliness of winter. And it was through telling stories that we would warn our children and teach them about our relationship with the natural world. Obviously, we use fairy stories a lot less these days because we have so many other different means of communication. But fundamentally, I think that the story is a way of explaining really big concepts in a way that anyone can understand. That's what it was used for hundreds of years ago. And that's what I am trying to do today. I thought that the structure and the tropes of a fairy story, like having talking animals and like this kind of magical parallel world, I thought that these things would enable me to talk about something as big and complicated and scary as climate change in a way that everyone could understand, and no matter how old the reader. And that's why I thought a fairy story was the right way to talk about climate change without it being too frightening or depressing or complicated.
Excellent. I'm sure Swara and Riya both really appreciate that response, MG. So moving from the broad arc of the story, if we could just sort of focus on Bianca for a bit. And so we know that the character of Bianca, she's determined, she's kind, loving, conscientious, and she's highly self-directed. She doesn't take no for an answer. She rewrites her own story quite literally in the book for everybody who's read it. Did you intend for this to be sort of an allegory for your young readers about the transformation that books and stories and reading and writing and a deep desire to actually want to do good can bring about, especially at a time like Christmas when there's a time of healing and new beginnings?
Yes. I think that stories are one of the most powerful tools that all human beings have to understand ourselves and the world in which we live and our relationship to it. And I think that stories have the power to almost rewire your brain. Often when I was young, I'm not a religious person and I wasn't brought up in a religious faith or family. And so I looked to stories to define what my moral code would be, the things that I was passionate about, the things that I needed to work on in myself. And so I find by reading as many stories as possible, which really helps us empathize with characters, you can make decisions about the kind of grown-up you want to be or the kind of future you want to have. You don't always have all of those possibilities in your real life. But by using stories, we can imagine all these different worlds, all these different outcomes of our choices. And one of the things that I believe as a writer is that I have a responsibility when I'm creating a story to really think about all of the different ways it could impact a reader. And one of the things I really wanted to do with this story is to show that a story can have a real impact on the inside of a person, and that can like inform who they grow into and what they might want to do with their lives. So the ice children themselves, you know, want to dedicate their lives to reversing the planet's warming. And that is all done through the power of storytelling. So that's a really key part of this. The power of books, the power of your imagination, the right you have as, because Bianca is independent in this story. She's a big sister, which is a key part of it. If you're the oldest child, often you feel a responsibility to your younger sibling. But her parents are absent in that moment because they are so concerned about her younger brother. She takes it upon herself to make some really big choices and to be brave. And that's the thing that stories gave me as a young reader. It made me be brave about things, particularly when it became to like moral decisions or things I wanted to do with my life. If I didn't have confidence from my immediate world surrounding me, it was through reading stories that I felt brave enough to attempt my own like missions. So storytelling is really important to me, obviously, as a writer, but very much in this story. I mean, I often say that, you know, a book is the shape of a door and it will take you into another world where anything is possible, and it's a safe space. And so that is very much embedded in this story.
Right. And just taking off from that, what you said about a book is like a door and it can take you anywhere and it's a safe space. Just to delve into the fantasy aspect of what happens when Bianca reads the book, it's essentially the whole act of reading itself is transformed. It becomes a multi-dimensional experience. So if you could just allow me to read from the text for a little bit, where you've said that she feels a deep thud like a muffled bass drum, beat like a second heart inside her chest. And the text goes on to add, there are illustrated snowflakes that fell in graceful, scattered patterns around the deeply resonant words. And she fancied they were moving, creating a tinkling sound, like the notes on a distant piano. It seems like if one could have a fantasy about how the act of reading could be elevated, this might be what it would look, sound, and feel like. Is this how you always imagined it would be like for you when words leap off the page and become real? And were there other versions of this experience that you wrote for Bianca?
So what I tried to encapsulate in that moment is my own personal experience as a reader. When I read stories, I really feel like when I'm inside that story, it's real. I go very deeply into my imagination. I feel very passionately. I see all the colors. I hear the music, and it's almost more real sometimes than the real world. And sometimes when I leave those places and those people that I've enjoyed spending time with in a story, I will feel bereft. I will feel a sense of grief. And of course, I've not moved anywhere. Everything is, it's like, it is like a kind of magic. And so when I wrote her journey into Winterton and the world of the winter elements, I wanted to try and encapsulate the magic of falling into a story and how it feels to me. Because, you know, you can be sitting calmly in a very cozy nook reading a book, but inside the book, there might be a dramatic fight and your heart might be racing and racing, but there's nothing happening in the real world to actually cause that. So it's all your imagination. I think imagination is one of the most powerful tools that we have as human beings, and it's one of the things that enables us to problem solve in a way that no other creature can, which is why I'm very hopeful that we will be able to find solutions to climate change, because we have this power, and that is what I try and encapsulate in those moments.
Oh, that's excellent. What a wonderful way for readers to think about the act of reading itself. So moving from there, from the book, here's a question for you from a student. Surbhi Sarkar of grade 5 at Inventure Academy in Bangalore says, why did you decide to make a book the object that was praising children?
So it's not the book itself that freezes the child. It's the act of reading the story of the death of winter, which is basically the warming of the planet. It's the act of learning and realizing that, because the book is called The Vanishing World, that this winter world is vanishing. And in learning that the winter world is vanishing, the story elicits a promise from the reader that they will sacrifice their own heart to the Snow Queen in the hope that they can save it. So the story in the vanishing world is a bit like a fairy's trick. You can't trust a fairy. When they make a deal with you, it inevitably is much worse than you think at the outset. So these children are really being hoodwinked into giving up their hearts to the Snow Queen. And so it's not the book itself, it's the story within its pages. And I've drawn from many other fairy stories for the ingredients of this fairy story. But the thing that makes this book particularly powerful is the granules of mirror dust that come from the original Hans Christian Andersen story of the Snow Queen. And that mirror in itself, it tricks the viewer into seeing something that isn't true. So, yeah, the book itself is a fairy's trick.
I'm sure Surabhi really appreciated that answer, and everybody else was wondering as well. So, MJ, just going back to something that you spoke about earlier, about how Bianca is an older sister, and that plays a huge role into the work that she does and the actions that she takes in the book. We have a student question from Zoe Chug of grade 6 at Fountainhead School in Surat, who says that the sibling relationships between Bianca and Finn and Ishild and Jack are important to the story. Why did you show two parallel sibling relationships? Do you have siblings? If yes, did that help you when you were writing your book? And one more question that she has is about why was Ishild the Snow Queen so different from the classic Snow Queen?
So there's a lot of questions there, so I'll try and take them one at a time. First of all, I am an older sister. I am the oldest of four. I have two brothers and one sister. And particularly with my youngest brother, I was a teenager when he was born, and I was very responsible for him. I think in big families, the older siblings become these kind of demi-parents, almost adults with a lot of additional work and responsibility. And that's something definitely that I had when I was younger. So I put a lot of my own experience as a big sister into the creation of Bianca. And I do think that older siblings often feel that it's their job to protect their younger siblings, because as the older sibling, you experience the harsh knocks that the world will often dish out, and you try and do your best to prevent that happening to your younger sibling. So, and I'm also a mother. Honestly, when I wrote the opening of the book, I wrote the thing that I would be most terrified of, to wake up in the night and find my own child gone from his bed, and then to hear that he was frozen in the city park, was just like a horror story to me. And so I used my own experience as a sibling and a mum to create that dynamic. But I also think that it was very important to me to personify the seasons. So Jack Frost and the North Wind and hail and sleet and the snow as children. In previous fairy stories where I've read personified seasons, like my prime example is the Oscar Wilde story, The Selfish Giant, where the winter seasons are used as a punishment to punish the giant's selfish behavior. They're always adult. Because, of course, a season is a very old thing. If you're going to personify it, people think it should be old. But I thought, if winter were appealing to the hearts of children, of course, the way that they would do it would be as children, even though they're hundreds and thousands of years old. And I actually thought that with the Snow Queen in her greatly weakened and reduced state because of climate change, there's no way that she would be a powerful, grown adult woman. What with the Arctic and the Antarctic ice caps slowly diminishing, I felt like, that would reduce the Snow Queen. And I thought that having her as a girl would also enable the reader to feel empathy and sympathy for what Jack is trying to do. He's just trying to save part of his family, as Bianca is, So what I really wanted to do in this story, in most stories that you read where winter is represented in any kind of a way. Winter is dangerous and bad and evil, and it symbolizes death. And it's in stories, it's always the baddie, it's always the villain. But we need to tell different stories if we are going to keep our planet at the temperature where the Arctic and the Antarctic can still exist. We need stories that actually show winter in a positive light and allow us to kind of relate to winter. And I felt like personifying them as children was definitely a strong way of doing that, because it's very easy to see adults as villains in young readers' stories, but children naturally empathize with other children. And I wanted to show the seasons as children. So there is a mirror between Jack trying to save Isilde and Bianca trying to save Finn. And obviously there's the connection between Isilde and Finn, which hurts Bianca's feelings. So they're very close. That mirroring is very closely constructed to try and make the reader feel empathy for the plight of the season.
Oh, I'm sure that that's given a lot of perspective to the readers. They might just go back and reread the book for this.
They should.
So, NG, since just touching on something that you have done and that you talked about in the session, you started the session by talking about what happens to Bianca after she's frozen. And you also said that the beginning of the book is a little dark. There are readers who may be, because it starts with children being frozen. So I know of a child, Adya Agarwal from Pep School in Bangalore, who started to read it. And she was a little anxious because she said, I don't know if I want to continue reading it. And her father, Anshuman, who's a friend of ours, said, I'll read it with you. So essentially, he read the book with her and he sort of held her hand through that reading experience. And it's something that I thought was such a nice echo of what happens in the book, of how Bianca's parents are waiting for Finn and they're holding her hand as she goes through this experience that they don't understand, but they're still there for her. And it seems like it's a parallel for parenting as well. Did you get feedback from readers that resonated with this part or this thread of the story?
Yes, and particularly from parents. One of the things that as a parent, I'm always dismayed by when I read with my children is how often parents are neglectful or sometimes just downright evil in children's stories, because as a dramatic device, often the author needs to get the parents out of the way so the children can have an adventure. But this often leads to really selfish parents or parents who are so busy they don't care about their kids. And as a parent, I find reading those stories with my children always a little disheartening. I want my children to enjoy stories, but I'd love it if the parents were loving, and as most parents are. And so one of the things about this story, and in particular about this issue, is that it's really important that both the children and the parents commit to making a difference together. I really don't like the narrative. Some adults will say, oh, the children have to save the planet now. And it's like, absolutely not. We're not dead yet. I've got a good 40 or 50 years left in me, and I intend to work as hard as I can to reverse the mistakes that my generation and previous generations have made before. We need to all hold hands and do it together. And in some ways, like Bianca's father is holding her hand and keeping his promise as she goes on her adventures. But in another way, she's taking him with her. That holding hands is reciprocal in both ways. You know, children can show adults different versions of the future, but adults, you know, at this moment in time have the power to make political changes. So I really wanted it to be a combination of generations, even though the adventure is Bianca's and it's for children. For the parent reading it, I want them too to also be an ice child, like to make a commitment. So, you know, we can't neglect adults. They have to come with us and we will hold their hands and do it. But I do appreciate that the beginning of this story is scary, and it had to be scary because climate change is scary. But I never write a story that doesn't have a happy ending, and I never will. So if you know my books, you know I will never, ever lead you to a dark place without leading you right back out the other side into the light.
Oh, that's lovely. And I'm sure readers appreciate finding the light in your books as well. So I think we have time for maybe one last question, MG. So we end this on something that's personal for you, which comes from Kaira Mohanraj, who's a part of our live audience, who says, in the book, winter is the prominent subject and is loved by everyone in the story. What are the little things that make you love the season? And what are the things that we can do to save the Snow Queen and this lovely season as the children of the NLF Reading Challenge?
Oh, lots of questions in there too. I personally, I adore winter. It's taken me quite a long time to learn why winter is important and the wonderful things about winter. I am a bird watcher. And one of the things that I've learned by watching birds is the differences in nature in each season and the importance of a winter season. Even if you live in a country that doesn't have snow, the season of winter, which happens mostly in the North Hemisphere, has an impact on the migration of birds. It has an impact on so many different other parts of the ecology of this planet. That we have to learn to appreciate it. We are no longer in a position where winter, the season, is likely to kill us as a species. In the old days, winter was the season that would kill human beings, and that was why it was vilified. We are much more likely as a species to suffer with flooding or some of the negative consequences of losing winter, of that ice melting. So one of the things that I think is important is to see winter in that fairy tale way. It's wonderful. Snow, of course, is a wonderful concept. I live in Brighton in England. We've got snow once in the last 3 years. It's not common. But if you can go to a place and enjoy the wonder of snow, that in itself is amazing. But the key way, I think, of everyone, no matter where you are on the planet, loving winter is through the creatures that need snowy habitats. And these are the creatures in the story of the Ice Children that become the winter creatures of every child. And these are creatures that we will lose, not just reindeer, but snow leopards and polar bears. And if we want a planet where these creatures can exist, we need to keep those habitats and landscapes. So even though it's not a habitat or landscape that I see very often, it's one that I really feel is important to exist, because the animals and the plants and all of the flora and fauna that exist in those habitats are wondrous to me. And I really want the world to remain full of wonder and full of those creatures. So that, I think, is the best way to really feel a connection with winter, even if you never get snowfall or you never see a frost fractal on a window. But you do learn about these amazing creatures that live in like snow hares or snowy owls, or, that need the cold. And it's through those creatures that I think we can appreciate winter. And when it comes to what little things we can do, as an individual, you can make tiny different shifts and changes to your own life. But really, it's about the choices you make going forward through your life, and the choices that are the people that we support and elect to be our governors and to make policies to rule us, how we spend our money. So to try and buy things that don't have plastic in and don't contribute negatively towards climate change. But really, it's through our voices. I mean, Greta Thunberg is a great hero of mine, because as a child, she just relentlessly used her voice to repeat the message that, she doesn't want the planet to get warmer. And I feel like that message still needs to be spoken regularly by people of all ages, and through the choices that we make and how we want to live our life and who we want to govern us, and to see ourselves as a global community, I think is very important. I probably will never go to the Arctic or the Antarctic, but if the Antarctic loses its west shelf of ice, the sea level will rise so many meters that my home will probably be underwater. So, we have to see ourselves as a global community. And I think we have to make choices as a community. And that's why It's not about one hero in the Ice Children. It's about all children and us all holding our parents' hands and bringing them with us. It's by global collective action that we'll make a difference. So, you know, as a lone person, there's very little you can do other than find like-minded people and move together to create a powerful voice. And that's what I hope stories can do.
Thank you very much, MG. That was a perfect note to end the session. I'm sure our students have gone away from this and will go away from this with lots of thoughts. Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure speaking with you. All the very best with all your new work. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. And thanks for choosing the Ice Children to read. I'm so delighted that you've had so many young readers read it.
It was our pleasure. All of us enjoyed it.
Oh, brilliant.
Thank you.